"Hail, Gimli, Gloin, son!" he cried. "I haven't had time to learn gentle speech under your rod, as you promised. But shall we not put aside our quarrel? At least I will speak no evil again of the Lady of the Wood." "I will forget my wrath for a while, Eomer, son of Eomund," said Gimli. "But if ever you chance to see the Lady Galadriel with your eyes, then you shall acknowledge her the fairest of ladies, or our friendship will end." "So be it," said Eomer. "But until that time, pardon me, and in token of pardon, ride with me, I beg. Gandalf will be at the head with the Lord of the Mark, but Firefoot, my horse, will bear us both, if you will." "I thank you indeed," said Gimli, greatly pleased. "I'll gladly go with you, if Legolas, my comrade, may ride beside us." "It shall be so," said Eomer. "Legolas upon my left, and Aragorn upon my right, and none will dare to stand before us." "Where's Shadowfax?" said Gandalf. "Running wild over the grass," they answered. "He'll let no man handle him. There he goes, away down by the ford, like a shadow among the willows." Gandalf whistled and called aloud the horse's name, and far away he tossed his head and neighed, and turning sped towards the host like an arrow. "Were the breath of the west wind to take a body visible, even so would it appear," said Eomer, as the great horse ran up until he stood before the wizard. "The gift seems all ready to be given," said Theoden, "but hearken all. Here now I name my guest, Gandalf Greyheim, wisest of counsellors, most welcome of wanderers, a lord of the Mark, a chieftain of the air lingers while our kin shall last, and I give to him Shadowfax, prince of horses." "I thank you, Theoden King," said Gandalf. Then suddenly he threw back his grey cloak, and cast aside his hat, and leapt to horseback. He wore no helm nor mail, his snowy hair flew free in the wind, his white robe shone dazzling in the sun. "Behold the White Rider," said Aragorn, and all took up the words. "Our king on the White Rider," they shouted. "Forth, Eorlingers!" The trumpet sounded, the horses reared and neighed, spear clashed on shield. Then the king raised his hand, and with a rush like the sudden onset of a great wind, the last host of Rohan rode thundering into the west. Far over the plain Eowyn saw the glitter of their spears as she stood still, alone before the doors of the silent house. Chapter 7. Helm's Deep. The sun was already westering as they rode from Edoras, and the light of it was in their eyes, turning all the rolling fields of Rohan to a golden haze. There was a beaten way, northwestward along the foothills of the White Mountains, and this they followed, up and down in a green country, crossing small, swift streams by many fords. Far ahead and to their right the misty mountains loomed. Ever darker and taller they grew as the miles went by. The sun went slowly down before them. Evening came behind. The host rode on. Need drove them. Fearing to come too late, they rode with all the speed they could, pausing seldom. Swift and enduring were the steeds of Rohan, but there were many leagues to go. 40 leagues and more it was, as a bird flies, from Edoras to the fords of the Isen, where they hoped to find the king's men that held back the hosts of Saruman. Night closed about them. At last they halted to make their camp. They had ridden for some 5 hours, and were far out upon the western plain, yet more than half their journey lay still before them. In a great circle, under the starry sky and the waxing moon, they now made their bivouac. They lit no fires, for they were uncertain of events, but they set a ring of mounted guards about them, and scouts rode out far ahead, passing like shadows in the folds of the land. The slow night passed without tidings or alarm. At dawn the horns sounded, and within an hour they took the road again. There were no clouds overhead yet, but a heaviness was in the air. It was hot for the season of the year. The rising sun was hazy, and behind it, Following it slowly up the sky, there was a growing darkness, as of a great storm moving out of the east. And away in the northwest there seemed to be another darkness brooding about the feet of the misty mountains, a shadow that crept slowly from the wizard's veil. Gandalf dropped back to where Legolas rode beside Éomer. "You have the keen eyes of your fair kindred, Legolas," he said, "and they can tell a sparrow from a finch a league off. Tell me, can you see anything away yonder toward Isengard?" "Many miles lie between," said Legolas, gazing thither and shading his eyes with his long hand. "I can see a darkness. There are shapes moving in it, great shapes far away upon the bank of the river, but what they are I can't tell. It's not mist or cloud that defeats my eyes. There is a veiling shadow that some power lays upon the land, and it marches slowly downstream. It's as if the twilight and the endless trees were flowing downwards from the hills." "And behind us comes a very storm of Mordor," said Gandalf. "It will be a black night." As the second day of their riding drew on, the heaviness in the air increased. In the afternoon, the dark clouds began to overtake them, a somber canopy with great billowing edges flecked with dazzling light. The sun went down, blood-red in a smoking haze. The spears of the riders were tipped with fire as the last shafts of light kindled the steep faces of the peaks of Three Hearn. Now very near they stood, on the northernmost arm of the White Mountains, three jagged horns staring at the sunset. In the last red glow, men in the vanguard saw a black speck, a horseman riding back towards them. They halted, awaiting him. He came, a weary man with dinted helm and cloven shield. Slowly he climbed from his horse and stood there a while, gasping. At length he spoke. "Is Éomer here?" he asked. "You've come at last, but too late and with too little strength. Things have gone evilly since Theodred fell. We were driven back yesterday over the ice and with great loss. Many perished at the crossing. Then at night fresh forces came over the river against our camp. All Isengard must be emptied, and Saruman has armed the wild hillmen and herd folk of Dunland beyond the rivers, and these also he loosed upon us. We were overmastered. The shield wall was broken. Erkenbrand of Westfold has drawn off those men he could gather towards his fastness in Helm's Deep. The rest are scattered. Where is Éomer? Tell him there's no hope ahead. He should return to Edoras before the wolves of Isengard come there." Theoden had sat silent, hidden from the man's sight behind his guards. Now he urged his horse forward. "Come, stand before me, Ceorl," he said. "I am here. The last host of the Eorlingers has ridden forth. It will not return without battle." The man's face lightened with joy and wonder. He drew himself up. Then he knelt, offering his notched sword to the king. "Command me, my lord," he cried, "and pardon me. You thought I remained in Meduseld, bent like an old tree under winter snow. So it was when you rode to war. But a west wind has shaken the boughs," said Theoden. "Give this man a fresh horse. Let us ride to the help of Erkenbrand." While Theoden was speaking, Gandalf rode a short way ahead, and he sat there alone, gazing north to Isengard and west to the setting sun. Now he came back. "Ride, Theoden," he said. "Ride to Helm's Deep. Go not to the fords of Isen, and don't tarry in the plain. I must leave you for a while. Shadowfax must bear me now on a swift errand." Turning to Aragorn and Éomer and the men of the king's household, he cried, "Keep well the Lord of the Mark till I return. Await me at Helm's Gate. Farewell." He spoke a word to Shadowfax, and like an arrow from the bow the great horse sprang away. Even as they looked, he was gone. A flash of silver in the sunset, a wind over the grass, a shadow that fled and passed from sight. Snowmane snorted and reared, eager to follow, but only a swift bird on the wing could have overtaken him. "What does that mean?" said one of the guards to Harmer. That Gandalf Greyhame has need of haste, answered Harmer. Ever he goes and comes unlooked for. Wormtongue, were he here, wouldn't find it hard to explain, said the other. True enough, said Harmer, but for myself, I'll wait until I see Gandalf again. Maybe you'll wait long, said the other. The host turned away now from the roads of the fords of Ison and bent their course southward. Night fell, and still they rode on. The hills drew near, but the tall peaks of Freehirn were already dim against the darkening sky. Still some miles away, on the far side of the Westfold Vale, lay a green combe, a great bay in the mountains, out of which a gorge opened in the hills. Men of that land called it Helm's Deep, after a hero of old wars who had made his refuge there. Ever steeper and narrower, it wound inward from the north under the shadow of the Freehirn, till the crow-haunted cliffs rose like mighty towers on either side, shutting out the light. At Helm's Gate, before the mouth of the deep, there was a heel of rock thrust outward by the northern cliff. There upon its spur stood high walls of ancient stone, and within them was a lofty tower. Men said that in the far-off days of the glory of Gondor, the sea kings had built here this fastness with the hands of giants.
Hey, Noda, how you doing?
The Hornburg, it was called, for a trumpet sounded upon the tower, echoed in the deep behind, as if armies long forgotten were issuing to war from caves beneath the hills. A wall, too.
Yeah, I'm a little blind right now. My
to the southern cliff,
glasses broke on me, so
beneath it, by a wide culvert, the dripping stream passed
I'll be blind for a little bit.
About the feet of the horn rocket wound.
How you been doing, I know that?
Through the midst of a wide green gore, sloping gently down from Helm's Gate to Helm's Dyke. Thence it fell into the deeping combe and out into the Westfold Vale. There in the Hornburg of Helm's Gate, Erkenbrand, master of Westfold on the borders of the Mark, now dwelt. As the days darkened with threats of war, being wise, he had repaired the wall and made the fastness strong. The riders were still in the low valley before the mouth of the combe, when cries and horn blasts were heard from their scouts that went in front. Out of the darkness arrows whistled. Swiftly a scout rode back and reported that wolf riders were abroad in the valley, and that a host of orcs and wild men were hurrying southward from the fords of Ison and seemed to be making for Helm's Deep. We found many of our folk lying slain as they fled thither, said the scout, and we've met scattered companies, going this way and that, leaderless. What has become of Erkenbrand, none seems to know. It's likely that he'll be overtaken ere he can reach Helm's Gate, if he's not already perished. Has aught been seen of Gandalf? Asked Theoden. Yes, Lord. Many have seen an old man in white upon a horse, passing hither and thither over the plains like a wind in the grass. Some thought he was Saruman. It's said that he went away at nightfall towards Isengard. Some say also that Wormtongue was seen earlier, going northward with a company of orcs. It will go ill with Wormtongue if Gandalf comes upon him, said Theoden. Nevertheless, I miss now both my counsellors, the old and the new. But in this need, we've no better choice than to go on, as Gandalf said, to Helm's Gate, whether Erkenbrand be there or no. Is it known how great is the host that comes from the north? It's very great, said the scout. He that flies counts every foeman twice. Yet I've spoken to stout-hearted men, and I don't doubt that the main strength of the enemy is many times as great as all that we have here. Then let us be swift, said Eomer. Let us drive through such foes as are already between us and the fastness. There are caves in Helm's Deep where hundreds may lie hid, and secret ways lead thence up onto the hills. Trust not to secret ways, said the king. Saruman has long spied out this land. Still in that place our defence may last long. Let us go. Aragorn and Legolas went out now with Eomer in the van. On through the dark night they rode, ever slower as the darkness deepened and their way climbed southward, higher and higher into the dim folds about the mountain's feet. They found few of the enemy before them. Here and there they came upon roving bands of orcs, but they fled ere the riders could take or slay them. It won't be long, I fear, said Aylmer, ere the coming of the king's host will be known to the leaders of our enemies, Saruman or whatever captain he's sent forth. The rumour of war grew behind them. Now they could hear, borne over the dark, the sound of harsh singing. They'd climbed far up into the deeping coombe when they looked back. Then they saw torches, countless points of fiery light upon the black fields behind, scattered like red flowers, or winding up from the lowlands in long flickering lines. Here and there a larger blaze leapt up. It's a great host and follows us hard, said Aragorn. They bring fire, said Theoden, and they're burning as they come, rick, cot, and tree. This was a rich vale and had many homesteads. Alas for my folk! Would that day was here, and we might ride down upon them like a storm out of the mountains, said Aragorn. It grieves me to fly before them. We needn't fly much further, said Eomer. Not far ahead now lies Helm's Dyke, an ancient trench and rampart scored across the coombe, 2 furlongs below Helm's Gate. There we can turn and give battle. Nay, we're too few to defend the dyke, said Theoden. It's a mile long or more, and the breach in it is wide. At the breach our rear guard must stand if we're pressed, said Eomer. There was neither star nor moon when the riders came to the breach.
Hey, Sam Squash, how you
where
doing?
The stream from above passed out, and the road beside it ran down from the Hornburg. The rampart loomed suddenly before them, a high shadow beyond a dark pit. As they rode up, a sentinel challenged them. The Lord of the Mark rides to Helm's Gate, Eomer answered. I, Eomer, son of Eormund, speak. This is good tidings beyond hope, said the sentinel. Hasten, the enemy is on your heels. The host passed through the breach and halted on the sloping sward above. They now learned to their joy that Erkenbrand had left many men to hold Helm's Gate, and more had since escaped thither. Maybe we have 1,000 fit to fight on foot, said Gambling, an old man, the leader of those that watched the dyke. But most of them have seen too many winters, as I have, or too few, as my son's son here. What news of Erkenbrand? Word came yesterday that he was retreating thither with all that's left of the best riders of Westfold. He's not come. I fear that he won't come now, said Eomer. Our scouts have gained no news of him, and the enemy fills all the valley behind us. I would that he'd escaped, said Theoden. He was a mighty man. In him lived again the valor of Helm the Hammerhand. We can't await him here. We must draw all our forces now behind the walls. Are you well stored? We bring little provision, for we rode forth to open battle, not to a siege. Behind us in the caves of the deep are 3 parts of the folk of Westfold, old and young, children and women, said Gamling. But great store of food, and many beasts and their fodder have also been gathered there. That is well, said Eomer. They are burning or despoiling all that is left in the vale. If they come to bargain for our goods at Helm's Gate, they'll pay a high price, said Gambling. The king and his riders passed on. Before the causeway that dismounted. They led their horses up the valley and passed within the gates of the There they were welcomed again with joy and renewed hope, for now there were men enough to man both the burg and the barrier wall. Quickly Eomer set his men in readiness. The king and the men of his household were in the Hornburg. There also were many of the Westfold men. But on the deeping wall and its tower, and behind it, Eomer arrayed most of the strength that he had. For here the defence seemed more doubtful, if the assault were determined and in great force. The horses were led far up the deep under such guard as could be spared. The deeping wall was 20 feet high, and so thick that 4 men could walk abreast along the top, sheltered by a parapet over which only a tall man could look. Here and there were clefts in the stone through which men could shoot. The battlement could be reached by a stair running down from a door in the outer court of the Hornburg. 3 flights of steps led also up onto the wall from the deep behind, but in front it was smooth, and the great stones of it were set with such skill that no foothold could be found at their joints, and at the top they hung over like a sea-delved cliff. Gimli stood leaning against the breastwork upon the wall. Legolas sat above on the parapet, fingering his bow and peering out into the gloom. "This is more to my liking," said the dwarf, stamping on the stones. "Ever my heart rises as we draw near the mountains. There's good rock here. This country has tough bones. I felt them in my feet as we came up from the dike. Give me a year and 100 of my kin, and I'd make this a place that armies would break upon like water." "I don't doubt it," said Legolas, "but you're a dwarf, and dwarves are strange. I don't like this place, and I shall like it no more by the light of day. But you comfort me, Gimli, and I'm glad to have you standing nigh with your stout legs and your hard axe. I wish there were more of your kin among us, but even more would I give for 100 good archers of Mirkwood. We shall need them. The Rohirrim have good bowmen after their fashion, but there are too few here, too few." "It's dark for archery," said Gimli. "Indeed, it's time for sleep. Sleep. I feel the need of it, as never I thought any dwarf could. Riding is tiring work, yet my axe is restless in my hand. Give me a row of oaken and all weariness will fall from me." A slow time passed. Far down in the valley, the fire still burned. The hosts of Isengard were advancing in silence now. Their torches could be seen winding up the coombe in many lines. Suddenly, from the dike, yells and screams, and the fierce battle cries of men broke out. Flaming brands appeared above the brink and clustered thickly at the breach. Then they scattered and vanished. Men came galloping back over the field and up the ramp to the Hornburg. The rear guard of the West had been driven in. "The enemy is at hand," they said. "We loosed every arrow that we had and filled the dike with orcs. But it won't hold them long. Already they're scaling the bank at many points, thick as marching ants. But we've taught them not to carry torches." It was now past midnight. The sky was utterly dark, and the stillness of the heavy air foreboded storm. Suddenly the clouds were seared by a blinding
flash. A nice dab of
branched lightning
some
smote
purple
down upon the
Urkel.
eastward hills. For a staring moment, the watchers on the wall saw the space between them and the dike lit with white light. It was whirling and crawling with black figures, some squat and broad, some tall and grim, with high helms and sable shields. Hundreds and hundreds more were pouring over the dike and through the breach. The dark tide flowed up to the walls from cliff to cliff. Thunder rolled in the valley. Rain came lashing down. Arrows thick and came whistling over the battlements and came glancing and glancing on the stones. Some found a mark. The assault on Helm's Deep had begun, but no sound or challenge was heard within. No answering arrows came. The assailing hosts halted, foiled by the silent menace of rock and wall. Ever and again the lightning tore aside the darkness. Then the orcs screamed, waving spear and sword, and shooting a cloud of arrows at any that stood revealed upon the battlements. And the men at the mark, amazed, looked out, as it seemed to them, upon a great dark horn, tossed by a tempest of war, and every ear gleamed with barbed light. Brazen trumpets sounded. The enemy surged forward, some against the deeping wall, others towards the causeway and the ramp that led up to the Hornburg gates. There the hugest orcs were mustered, and the wild men of the Dunland fells. A moment they hesitated, and then on they came. The lightning flashed, and blazoned upon every helm and shield the ghastly hand of Isengard was seen. They reached the summit of the rock. They drove towards the gates. Then at last an answer came. A storm of arrows met them, and a hail of stones. They wavered, broke, and fled back, and then charged again, broke and charged again, and each time, like the incoming sea, they halted at a higher point. The trumpets rang, and a press of roaring men leapt forth. They held their great shields above them like a roof, while in their midst they bore two trunks of mighty trees. Behind them, orc archers crowded, sending a hail of darts against the bowmen on the walls. They gained the gates. The trees, swung by strong arms.
Oh, I still smoke a flower. Right now, this is
If any man fell, crushed by
a bowl of
stone
roaches
from
that I
above,
topped with some
two others
wax.
sprang to take his place. Again and again the great ram swung and crashed. Eomer and Aragorn stood together on the leaping wall. They heard the roar of voices and the thudding of the rams, and then in a sudden flash of light they beheld the peril of the gates. "Come," said Aragorn, "this is the hour when we draw swords together." Running like fire, they sped along the wall and up the steps, and passed into the outer court upon the rock. As they gathered a handful of swords. There was a small postern door that opened in an angle of the berg wall on the west, where the cliff stretched out to meet it. On that side, a narrow path ran around towards the great gate, between the wall and the sheer brink of the rock. Together, Eomer and Aragorn sprang through the door, their men close behind. The swords flashed from the sheath as one. "Go, Thwina," cried Eomer. "Go, Thwina, for the mark." "Andoril," cried Aragorn. "Andoril for the Dunedain." Charging from the side, they hurled themselves upon the wild men. Andoril rose and fell, gleaming with white fire. A shout went up from wall and tower. "Andoril! Andoril goes to war! The blade that was broken shines again!" Dismayed, the rammers let fall the trees and turned to fight. But the wall of their shields was broken as by a lightning stroke, and they were swept away, hewn down, or cast over the rock into the stony stream below. The orc archers shot wildly and then fled. For a moment, Eomer and Aragorn halted before the gates. The thunder was rumbling in the distance now. The lightning flickered still, far off among the mountains in the south. A keen wind was blowing from the north again. The clouds were torn and drifting, and stars peeped out. And above the hills of the Coombe side the westering moon rode, glimmering yellow in the storm rack. "We didn't come too soon," said Aragorn, looking at the gates. Their great hinges and iron bars were wrenched and bent. Many of their timbers were cracked. "Yet we can't stay here beyond the walls to defend them," said Eomer. "Look," he pointed to the causeway. Already a great press of orcs and men were gathered again beyond the stream. Arrows whined and skipped on the stones about them. "Come, we must get back and see what we can do to pile stone and beam across the gates within. Come now." They turned and ran. At that moment, some 24 orcs that had lain motionless among the slain leapt to their feet and came silently and swiftly behind. Two flung themselves to the ground at Eomer's heels, tripped him, and in a moment they were on top of him. But a small dark figure that none had observed sprang out of the shadows and gave a hoarse shout. "Baruch Khazad! Khazad I Menu!" An axe swung and swept back.
Shit.
2 orcs fell headless. The rest fled. Eomer struggled to his feet, even as Aragorn ran back to his aid. The postern was closed again. The iron door was barred and piled inside with stones. When all was safe within, Eomer turned. "I thank you, Gimli, son of Gloin," he said. "I didn't know that you were with us in the sortie, but oft the unbidden guest proves the best company. How came you here?" "I followed you to shake off sleep," said Gimli. "But I looked on the hillmen and they seemed over large for me, so I sat beside a stone to see your sword play." "I shan't find it easy to repay you," said Eomer. "There may be many a chance ere the night is over," laughed the dwarf, "but I am content. Till now I've hewn naught but wood since I left Moria." "Two," said Gimli, patting his axe. He'd turned to his place on the wall. "Two?" said Legolas. "I've done better, though now I must grope for spent arrows, all mine are gone. Yet I make my tale 20 at the least, but that's only a few leaves in the forest." The sky now was quickly clearing, and the sinking moon was shining brightly, but the light brought little hope to the riders of the mark. The enemy before them seemed to have grown rather than diminished. and still more were pressing up from the valley through the breach. The sortie upon the rock gained only a brief respite. The assault on the gates was redoubled. Against the deepening wall the hosts of Isengard roared like a sea. Orcs and hillmen swarmed about its feet from end to end. Ropes with grappling hooks were hurled over the parapet, faster than men could cut them or fling them back. Hundreds of long ladders were lifted up. Many were cast down in ruin, but many more replaced them, and orcs sprang up them like apes in the dark forests of the south. Before the wall's foot, the dead and broken were piled like shingle in a storm. Ever higher rose the hideous mounds, and still the enemy came on. The men of Rome were weary. All their arrows were spent, and every dart was shot. Their swords were notched, and their shields were riven. 3 times Aragorn and Eomer rallied them, and 3 times Andúril flamed in a desperate charge that drove the enemy from the wall.
Thankfully,
Then a
me and
arose in the
most
behind.
hated, we like
like
rolling a lot of joints,
through which the stream flowed out. There they had gathered in the
especially
shadow
when
of
we
the
harvest.
until the assault above was hottest,
So
and nearly all the men of the
we
defense
pretty much
had rushed to the
always
wall's
have
top.
roaches for when
Then
we
they
run
sprang
out
out.
or for emergencies.
Already some had passed into the
We
doors
have
of the
this
deep, and were among the horses,
little Folgers
fighting with the
can,
guards.
like a little plastic Folgers
Down
can
from the wall
that
leapt Gimli with a
we
fierce
have
cry
pretty
that
much
echoed in the cliffs.
filled up with roaches.
Khazad! Khazad! He soon had work enough.
We'll get into it
he shouted.
once in a
The
while.
orcs are behind the wall. Hey, oi! Come, Legolas. There
So
are
when we
enough
run
for us
out,
both.
but
Khazad, aye, Menu.
they're pretty much
Gambling the old looked
it hasn't
down from
hardly
the wall,
gone to the
hearing
halfway
great voice
point
of the dwarf
in a while.
above all the tumult. The orcs are in the deep.
We get it
cried.
down all low.
Helm, for Helmingers.
Well, like I said, we haven't even got it to the halfway point
many men
empty.
of Westfold at his
And
back.
by the time we get more,
Their onset was
we end up
fierce and
filling it
sudden,
back up again
and the
because,
orcs gave way before them.
yeah,
Ere long
me
they
and
were
most hated,
hemmed in the narrows of
we
the
roll a lot
gorge,
of
and all
joints,
were slain
blunts,
or driven shrieking into the chasm of the deep
pack
to
cones.
fall before the guardians of the hidden caves. 21, cried Gimli. He hewed a 2-handed stroke and laid the last orc before his feet.
Oh,
Now
we do, because we know that
again.
you do have hard times
We
where
must stop this
you run out
hole,
of
said Gambling.
weed, so
Dwarves are said to be cunning
instead of
folk with
scraping
stone.
our pipes
Against
and
your
smoking
master.
resin,
We
just save
don't
your
shape
roaches.
stone with battle axes,
Fight
nor
the
with our
urge.
fingernails, said Gimli. But I'll help as I may. They gathered such small boulders and broken stones as they could find to hand, and under Gimli's direction, the Westfold men blocked up the inner end of the culvert until only a narrow outlet remained. Then the deepening stream, swollen by the rain, churned and fretted in its choked path, and spread slowly in cold pools from cliff to cliff. It will be drier above, said Gimli. Come, Gambling, let's see how things go on the wall. He climbed up and found Legolas beside Aragorn and Eomer. The elf was whetting his long knife. There was for a while a lull in the assault, since the attempt to break in through the culvert had been foiled. 21, said Gimli. Good, said Legolas, but my count is now 24. It's been knife work up here. Eomer and Aragorn leant wearily on their swords. Away on the left, the crash and clamour of the battle on the rock rose loud again, but the Hornburg still held fast, like an island in the sea. Its gates lay in ruin, but over the barricade of beams and stones within, no enemy as yet had passed. Aragorn looked at the pale stars and at the moon, now sloping behind the western hills that enclosed the valley. This is a night as long as years, he said. How long will the day tarry? Dawn is not far off, said Gambling, who had now climbed up beside him. But dawn won't help us, I fear. Yet dawn is ever the hope of men, said Aragorn. For these creatures of Isengard, these half-orcs and goblin men that the foul craft of Saruman has bred, they'll not quail at the sun, said Gambling, and neither will the wild men of the hills. Don't you hear their voices? I hear them, said Eomer, but they're only the scream of birds and the bellowing of beasts to my ears. Yet there are many that cry in the Dunland tongue, said Gambling. I know that tongue. It's an ancient speech of men, and once was spoken in many western valleys of the Mark. Hark, they hate us, and they're glad, for our doom seems certain to them. The king, they cry. We'll take their king. Death to the Foregoil, death to the Strawheads, death to the robbers of the north. Such names they have for us. Not in 500 years have they forgotten their grievance that the lords of Gondor gave the mark to Eol the Young and made alliance with him. That old hatred Saruman is inflamed. They're fierce folk when aroused. They'll not give way now for dusk or dawn until Theron is taken, or they themselves are slain. Nonetheless, they will bring hope to me.
The cones are right, but I'd rather have
not said that no foe has ever taken the Hornburg.
A nice, good-sized joint.
So the minstrels say, said Éomer. Then let us defend it and hope, said Aragorn. Even as they spoke, there came a blare of trumpets. Then there was a crash and a flash of flame and smoke. The waters of the deeping stream poured out hissing and foaming. They were choked no longer. A gaping hole was blasted in the wall. A host of dark shapes poured in. Devilry of Saruman, cried Aragorn. They've crept in the culvert again while we talked, and they've lit the fire of Orthanc beneath our feet. Elendil, Elendil, he shouted as he leapt down into the breach. But even as he did so, 100 ladders were raised against the battlements. Over the wall and under the wall, the last assault came sweeping like a dark wave upon a hill of sand. The defense was swept away. Some of the riders were driven back, further and further into the deep, falling and fighting as they gave way, step by step, towards the caves. Others cut their way back towards the citadel. A broad stairway climbed from the deep up to the rock and the rear gate of the Hornburg.
My brother
Near the bottom stood Aragorn.
Easy,
in his hand still, Andúril gleamed, and the terror of the sword for a while held back the enemy, as one by one all who came the stair passed up towards the gate. Behind on the upper steps knelt Legolas. His bow was bent, but one gleamed arrow was all that he had left, and he peered out now, ready to shoot the first orc that should dare to approach the stair. All who can have now got safe within, Aragorn, he called. Come back. Aragorn turned and sped up the stair, but as he ran he stumbled in his weariness. At once his enemies leapt forward. Up came the orcs, yelling, with their long arms stretched out to seize him. The foremost fell with Legolas's last arrow in his throat, but the rest sprang over him. Then a great boulder, cast from the outer wall above, crashed down upon the stair and hurled them back into the deep. Aragorn gained the door, and swiftly it clanged to behind him. Things go ill, my friends, he said, wiping the sweat from his brow with his arm. Ill enough, said Legolas, but not yet hopeless. While we have you with us, where's Gimli? I don't know, said Aragorn. I last saw him fighting on the ground behind the wall, but the enemy swept us apart. Alas, that's evil news, said Legolas. He's stout and strong, said Aragorn. Let's hope that he'll escape back to the caves. There he'd be safe for a while, safer than we. Such a refuge would be to the liking of a dwarf. That must be my hope, said Legolas, but I wish that it'd come this way. I desired to tell Master Gimli that my tale is now 39. If he wins back to the caves, he'll pass your count again, laughed Aragorn. Never did I see an axe so wielded. I must go and seek some arrows, said Legolas. Would that this night would end, and I could have better light for shooting. Aragorn now passed into the citadel. There, to his dismay, he learned that Éomer hadn't reached the Hornburg. Nay, he didn't come to the rock, said one of the Westfold men. I last saw him gathering men about him and fighting in the mouth of the deep. Gambling was with him, and the dwarf, but I couldn't come to them. Aragorn strode on through the inner court and mounted to a high chamber in the tower. There stood the king, dark against a narrow window, looking out upon the vale. What is the news, Aragorn? He said. The deeping wall is taken, Lord, and all the defence swept away, but many have escaped hither to the rock. Is Éomer here? No, Lord, but many of your men retreated into the deep, and some say that Éomer was amongst them. In the narrows they may hold back the enemy and come within the caves. What hope they may have then, I don't know. More than we. Good provision, it said, and the air is wholesome there because of the outlets through fissures in the rock far above. None can force an entrance against determined men. They may hold out long. But the orcs have brought a devilry from Orthanc, said Aragorn. They have a blasting fire, and with it they took the wall. If they can't come in the caves, they may seal up those that are inside. But now we must turn all our thoughts to our own. I fret in this prison, said Theoden. If I could have set a spear in rest, riding before my men upon the field, maybe I could have felt again the joy of battle, and so ended. But I serve little purpose here. Here at least you're guarded in the strongest fastness of the mark, said Aragorn. More hope we have to defend you in the Hornburg than in Edoras, or even at Dunharrow in the mountains. It's said that the Hornburg has never fallen to assault, said Theoden. But now my heart is doubtful. The world changes, and all that once was strong now proves unsure. How shall any tower withstand such numbers and such reckless hate? Had I known that the strength of Isengard was grown so great, maybe I shouldn't so rashly have ridden forth to meet it. For all the arts of Gandalf, his counsel seems not now so good as it did under the morning sun. Don't judge the counsel of Gandalf until all is over, Lord, said Aragorn. The end will not be long, said the king. But I won't end here, taken like an old badger in a trap. Snowmane and Harsofel and the horses of my guard are in the inner court. When dawn comes, I'll bid my men sound Helm's horn, and I'll ride forth. Will you ride with me then, son of Arathorn? Maybe we shall cleave a road, or make such an end as will be worth a song, if any be left to sing of us hereafter. I'll ride with you, said Aragorn. Taking his leave, he returned to the walls, and passed round all their circuit, enheartening the men, and lending aid wherever the assault was hot. Legolas went with him. Blasts of fire leapt up from below, shaking the stones. Grappling hooks were hurled, and ladders raised. Again and again the orcs gained the summit of the outer wall, and again the defenders cast them down. At last Aragorn stood above the great gates, heedless of the darts of the enemy. As he looked forth, he saw the eastern sky grow pale. Then he raised his empty hand, palm outward in token of parley. The orcs yelled and jeered. Come down, they cried. If you wish to speak to us, come down. Bring out your king. We're the fighting Uruk-hai. We'll fetch him from his hole if he doesn't come. Bring out your skulking king. The king stays or comes at his own will, said Aragorn. Then what are you doing here? They answered. Why do you look out? Do you wish to see the greatness of our army? We are the fighting Uruk-hai. I looked out to see the dawn, said Aragorn. What of the dawn? They jeered. We are the Uruk-hai. We don't stop the fight for night or day, for fair weather or for storm. We come to kill by sun or moon. What of the dawn? None knows what the new day shall bring him, said Aragorn. Get you gone, ere it turn to your evil. Get down or we'll shoot you from the wall, they cried. This is no parley. You've nothing to say. I have still this to say, answered Aragorn. No enemy has yet taken the Hornburg. Depart, or not one of you will be spared. Not one will be left alive to take back tidings to the north. You don't know your peril. So great a power and royalty was revealed in Aragorn as he stood there alone above the ruined gates before the host of his enemies, that many of the wild men paused and looked back over their shoulders to the valley, and some looked up doubtfully at the sky. But the orcs laughed with loud voices, and a hail of darts and arrows whistled over the wall as Aragorn leaped down. There was a roar and a blast of fire. The archway of the gate above which he had stood a moment before crumbled and crashed in smoke and dust. The barricade was scattered as if by a thunderbolt. Aragorn ran to the king's tower. But even as the gate fell, and the orcs about it yelled, preparing to charge. A murmur arose behind them, like a wind in the distance, and it grew to a clamour of many voices crying strange news in the dawn. The orcs upon the rock, hearing the rumour of dismay, wavered and looked back, and then, sudden and terrible, from the tower above, the sound of the great horn of Helm rang out. All that heard that sound trembled. Many of the orcs cast themselves on their faces and covered their ears with their claws. Back from the deep the echoes came, blast upon blast, as if on every cliff and hill a mighty herald stood. But on the walls men looked up, listening with wonder, for the echoes didn't die. Ever the horn blasts wound on among the hills. Nearer now and louder they answered one to another, blowing fierce and free. "Helm! Helm!" the riders shouted. "Helm is arisen and comes back to war. Helm for Theoden king!" And with that shout the king came. His horse was white as snow, golden was his shield, and his spear was long. At his right hand was Aragorn, Elendil's heir. Behind him rode the lords of the house of Eorl the Young. Light sprang in the sky. Night departed. "Forth, Eorlingers!" With a cry and a great noise they charged. Down from the gates they roared. Over the causeway they swept, and they drove through the hosts of Isengard as a wind among grass. Behind them from the deep came the stern cries of men issuing from the caves, driving forth the enemy. Out poured all the men that were left upon the rock, and ever the sound of blowing horns echoed in the hills. On they rode, the king and his companions. Captains and champions fell or fled before them. Neither orc nor man withstood them. Their backs were to the swords and spears of the riders, and their faces to the valley. They cried and wailed, for fear and great wonder had come upon them with the rising of the day. So King Theoden rode from Helm's Gate and clove his path to the great dyke. There the company halted. Light grew bright about them. Shafts of the sun flared above the eastern hills and glimmered on their spears. But they sat silent on their horses, and they gazed down upon the deeping pool. The land had changed. Where before the green dale had lain, its grassy slopes lapping the ever-mounting hills, there now a forest loomed. Great trees, bare and silent, stood rank on rank, with tangled bough and hoary head. Their twisted roots were buried in the long green grass. Darkness was under them. Between the dyke and the eaves of the nameless wood only 2 open furlongs lay. There now cowered the proud hosts of Saruman, in terror of the king and in terror of the trees. They streamed down from Helm's Gate until all above the dyke was empty of them. Just below it they were packed like swarming flies. Vainly they crawled and clambered about the walls of the combe, seeking to escape. Upon the east, too sheer and stony was the valley's side. Upon the left, from the west, their final doom approached. There, suddenly, upon a ridge appeared a rider, clad in white, shining in the rising sun. Over the low hills the horns were sounding. Behind him, hastening down the long slopes, were 1,000 men on foot. Their swords were in their hands. Amid them strode a man tall and strong. His shield was red. As he came to the valley's brink, he set to his lips a great black horn and blew a ringing blast. "Erkenbrand!" the rider shouted. "Erkenbrand!" "Behold the White Rider!" cried Aragorn. "Gandalf is come again!" "Mithrandir! Mithrandir!" said Legolas. "This is wizardry indeed. Come, I would look on this forest ere the spell changes." The hosts of Isengard roared, swaying this way and that, turning from fear to fear. Again the horn sounded from the tower. Down through the breach of the dyke charged the king's company. Down from the hills leaped Erkenbrand, lord of Westfold. Down leaped Shadowfax, like a deer that runs sure-footed in the mountains. The White Rider was upon them, and the terror of his coming filled the enemy with madness. The wild men fell on their faces before him. The orcs reeled and screamed and cast aside both sword and spear. Like a black smoke driven by a mounting wind they fled. Wailing they passed under the waiting shadow of the trees, and from that shadow none ever came again. Chapter 8. The Road to Isengard. So it was that in the light of a fair morning King Theoden and Gandalf the White Rider met again upon the grass beside the deeping stream. There was also Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and Legolas the elf, and Erkenbrand the Westfold, and the lords of the Golden House. About them were gathered the Rohirrim, the riders of the Mark. Wonder overcame their joy in victory, and their eyes were turned towards the wood. Suddenly there was a great shout, and down from the dyke came those who had been driven back into the deep. There came Gamling the Old, and Eomer, son of Eärmund, and beside them walked Gimli the dwarf. He had no helm, and about his head was a linen band stained with blood, but his voice was loud and strong. 42, Master Legolas, he cried. Alas, my axe is notched. The 42nd had an iron collar on his neck. How is it with you? You passed my score by 1, answered Legolas, but I don't grudge you the game. So glad am I to see you on your legs. Welcome, Eomer, sister son, said Theoden. Now that I see you safe, I'm glad indeed. Hail, Lord of the Mark, said Eomer. The dark night has passed, and day has come again, but the day has brought strange tidings. He turned and gazed in wonder, first at the wood and then at Gandalf. Once more you come in the hour of need, unlooked for, he said. Unlooked for? Said Gandalf. I said that I'd return and meet you.
I hate not having my glasses. Gives me real bad headaches.
Nor foretell the manner of your coming. Strange help you bring. You are mighty in wizardry, Gandalf the White. That may be, but if so, I've not shown it yet. I've but given good counsel in peril, and made use of the speed of Shadowfax. Your own valor has done more, and the stout legs of the Westfold men marching through the night. Then they all gazed at Gandalf with still greater wonder. Some glanced darkly at the wood, and passed their hands over their brows, as if they thought their eyes saw otherwise than his. Gandalf laughed long and merrily. The trees, he said. Nay, I see the wood as plainly as do you. But that's no deed of mine. It's a thing beyond the counsel of the wise, better than my design, and better even than my hope the event has proved. Then if not yours, whose is the wizardry? Said Theoden. Not Saruman's, that's plain. Is there some mightier sage of whom we have yet to learn? It's not wizardry, but a power far older, said Gandalf. A power that walked the earth, ere elf sang or hammer rang, ere iron was found or tree was hewn, when young was mountain under moon, ere ring was made or wrought was woe, it walked the forests long ago. And what may be the answer to your riddle? Said Theoden. If you would learn that, you should come with me to Isengard, answered Gandalf. To Isengard? They cried. Yes, said Gandalf. I shall return to Isengard, and those who will may come with me. There we may see strange things. But there are not men enough in the Mark, not if they were all gathered together and healed of wounds and weariness, to assault the stronghold of Saruman, said Theoden. Nevertheless, to Isengard I go, said Gandalf. I shan't stay there long. My way lies now eastward. Look for me in Edoras, ere the waning of the moon. Nay, said Theoden, in the dark hour before dawn I doubted, but we won't part now. I'll come with you, if that's your counsel. I wish to speak with Saruman as soon as may be now, said Gandalf. And since he's done you great injury, it would be fitting if you were there. But how soon and how swiftly will you ride? My men are weary with battle, said the king, and I'm weary also, for I've ridden far and slept little. Alas, my old age is not feigned, nor due only to the whisperings of Wormtongue. It's an ill that no leech can wholly cure, not even Gandalf.
Hope you're doing well.
Then let all who are to ride with me rest now, said Gandalf. We'll journey under the shadow of evening. It's as well, for it's my counsel that all our comings and goings should be as secret as may be, henceforth. But don't command many men to go with you, Theoden. We go to a parley, not to a fight. The king then chose men that were unhurt and had swift horses, and he sent them forth with tidings of the victory into every vale of the Mark. and they bore his summons also, bidding all men, young and old, to come in haste to Edoras. There the lord of the mark would hold an assembly of all that could bear arms on the second day under the full moon. To ride with him to Isengard the king chose Eomer and 20 men of his household. With Gandalf would go Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli. In spite of his hurt, the dwarf wouldn't stay behind. "It was only a feeble blow, and the cap turned it," he said. "It would take more than such an orc scratch to keep me back." "I'll tend it while you rest," said Aragorn.
Bravo, Chris. J'espère que tu vas bien,
said Aragorn. The king now returned to the Hornburg and slept such a sleep of quiet as he had not known for many years, and the remainder of his chosen company rested also. But the others, all that were not hurt or wounded, began a great labour, for many had fallen in the battle and lay dead upon the field or in the deep. No orcs remained alive. Their bodies were uncounted, but a great many of the hillmen had given themselves up, and they were afraid and cried for mercy. The men of the mark took their weapons from them and set them to work. "Help now to repair the evil in which you have joined," said Erkenbrand, "and afterwards you shall take an oath never again to pass the fords of Ison in arms, nor to march with the enemies of men, and then you shall go free back to your land. For you have been deluded by Saruman. Many of you have got death as the reward of your trust in him. But had you conquered, little better would your wages have been." The men of Dunland were amazed, for Saruman had told them that the men of Rohan were cruel and burned their captives alive. In the midst of the field before the Hornburg, 2 mounds were raised, and beneath them were laid all the riders of the mark who fell in the defence, those of the East Dales upon one side, and those of Westfold upon the other. In a grave alone under the shadow of the Hornburg lay Hama, captain of the king's guard. He fell before the gate. The orcs were piled in great heaps, away from the mounds of men, not far from the eaves of the forest, and the people were troubled in their minds, for the heaps of carrion were too great for burial or for burning. They had little wood for firing, and none would have dared to take an axe to the strange trees, even if Gandalf had not warned them to hurt neither bark nor bough at their great peril. "Let the orcs lie," said Gandalf. "The morning may bring new counsel." In the afternoon the king's company prepared to depart. The work of burial was then but beginning, and Theoden mourned for the loss of Hama, his captain, and cast the first earth upon his grave. "Great injury indeed has Saruman done to me and all this land," he said, "and I remember it when we meet." The sun was already drawing near the hills upon the west of the Coombe, when at last Theoden and Gandalf and their companions rode down from the dike. Behind them were gathered a great host, both of the riders and of the people of Westfold, old and young, women and children, who had come out from the caves. A song of victory they sang with clear voices, and then they fell silent, wondering what would chance, for their eyes were on the trees and they feared them. The riders came to the wood, and they halted, horse and man. They were unwilling to pass in. The trees were grey and menacing, and a shadow or a mist was about them. The ends of their long, sweeping boughs hung down like searching fingers. Their roots stood up from the ground like the limbs of strange monsters, and dark caverns opened beneath them. But Gandalf went forward, leading the company, and where the road from the Hornburg met the trees, they saw now an opening like an arched gate under mighty boughs, and through it Gandalf passed, and they followed him. Then, to their amazement, they found that the road ran on, and the deeping stream beside it, and the sky was open above and full of golden light. But on either side the great aisles of the wood were already wrapped in dusk, stretching away into impenetrable shadows, and there they heard the creaking and groaning of boughs, and far cries, and a rumour of wordless voices murmuring angrily. No orc or other living creature could be seen. Legolas and Gimli were now riding together upon one horse, and they kept close beside Gandalf, for Gimli was afraid of the wood. "It's hot in here," said Legolas to Gandalf. "I feel a great wrath about me. Do you not feel the air throb in your ears?" "Yes," said Gandalf. "What has become of the miserable orcs?" said Legolas. "That, I think, no one will ever know," said Gandalf. They rode in silence for a while, but Legolas was ever glancing from side to side, and would often have halted to listen to the sounds of the wood, if Gimli had allowed it. "These are the strangest trees that ever I saw," he said, "and I have seen many an oak grow from acorn to ruinous age. I wish that there were leisure now to walk among them. They have voices, and in time I might come to understand their thought." "No, no," said Gimli. "Let us leave them. I guess their thoughts already. Hatred of all that goes on two legs, and their speeches of crushing and strangling." "Not of all that go on two legs," said Legolas. "There I think you're wrong. It is orcs that they hate, for they don't belong here and know little of elves and men. Far away are the valleys where they sprang. From the deep dales of Fangorn, Gimli. That is whence they come, I guess." "Then that is the most perilous wood in Middle-earth," said Gimli. "I should be grateful for the part that they've played, but I don't love them. You may think them wonderful, but I've seen a greater wonder in this land, more beautiful than any grove or glade that ever grew. My heart is still full of it. Strange are the ways of men, Legolas. Here they have one of the marvels of the northern world, and what do they say of it? Caves, they say, caves. Holes to fly to in time of war, to store fodder in. My good Legolas, do you know that the caverns of Helm's Deep are vast and beautiful? There would be an endless pilgrimage of dwarves, merely to gaze at them, if such a thing were known to be. Aye, indeed, they would pay pure gold for a brief glance." "And I would give gold to be excused," said Legolas, "and double to be let out if I strayed in." "You've not seen, so I forgive your jest," said Gimli. "But you speak like a fool. You think those hills are fair, where your king dwells under the hill in Mirkwood, and dwarves helped in their making long ago? They're but hovels compared with the caverns I've seen here, immeasurable halls, filled with an everlasting music of water that tinkles into pools, as fair as Caled's Aram in the starlight. And Legolas, when the torches are kindled and men walk on the sandy floors under the echoing domes, then Legolas, gems and crystals and veins of precious gold glint in the polished walls, and the light glows through folded marbles, shell-like, translucent as the living hands of Queen Galadriel. There are columns of white and saffron and dawn rose, Legolas, fluted and twisted into dream-like forms. They spring up from many-colored floors to meet the glistening pendants of the roof. Wings, ropes, curtains fine as frozen clouds, spears, banners, pinnacles of suspended palaces. Still lakes mirror them. A glimmering world looks up from dark pools covered with clear glass. Cities, such as the mind of Durin could scarce have imagined in his sleep, stretch on through avenues and pillared courts, on into the dark recesses where no light can come, and plink, a silver drop falls, and the round wrinkles in the glass make all the towers bend and waver like weeds and corals in a grotto of the sea. Then evening comes, they fade and twinkle out. The torches pass on into another chamber and another dream. There is chamber after chamber, Legolas, hall opening out of hall, dome after dome, stair beyond stair, and still the winding paths lead on into the mountain's heart. Caves, the caverns of Helm's Deep. Happy was the chance that drove me there. It makes me weep to leave them. "Then I'll wish you this fortune for your comfort, Gimli," said the elf, "that you may come safe from war and return to see them again. But don't tell all your kindred.
Hey, Brian, how you
little
doing?
left for them to do, from your account. Maybe the men of this land are wise to say little. One family of busy dwarves with hammer and chisel might mar more than they made. No, you don't understand, said Gimli. No dwarf could be unmoved by such loveliness. None of Durin's race would mine those caves for stones or ore, not if diamonds and gold could be got there. You cut down groves of blossoming trees in the springtime for firewood. We would tend these glades of flowering stone, not quarry them. With cautious skill, tap by tap, a small chip of rock, and no more, perhaps, in a whole anxious day. So we could work, and as the years went by, we should open up new ways and display far chambers that are still dark, glimpsed only as a void beyond fissures in the rock. And lights, Legolas, we should make lights, such lamps as once shone in Khazad-dûm, and when we wished we would drive away the night that has lain there since the hills were made, and when we desired rest, we would let the night return. You move me, Gimli, said Legolas. I've never heard you speak like this before. Almost you make me regret that I've not seen these caves. Come, let's make this bargain. If we both return safe out of the perils that await us, we'll journey for a while together. You shall visit Fangorn with me, and then I'll come with you to see Helm's Deep. That would not be the way of return that I should choose, said Gimli. But I'll endure Fangorn if I have your promise to come back to the caves and share their wonder with me. You have my promise, said Legolas, but alas, now we must leave behind both cave and wood for a while. See, we're coming to the end of the trees. How far is it to Isengard, Gandalf? About 15 leagues, as the crows of Saruman make it, said Gandalf. 5 from the mouth of Deeping Combe to the fords, and 10 more from there to the gates of Isengard. But we shan't ride all the way this night. And when we come there, what shall we see? Said Gimli. You may know, but I can't guess. I don't know myself for certain, answered the wizard. I was there at nightfall yesterday, but much may have happened since. Yet I think that you'll not say that the journey was in vain, not though the glittering caves of Aglaron be left behind. At last the company passed through the trees, and found that they had come to the bottom of the combe, where the road from Helm's Deep branched, going one way east to Edoras, and the other north to the fords of Isen. As they rode from under the eaves of the wood, Legolas halted and looked back with regret. Then he began a sudden cry. There are eyes, he said. Eyes looking out from the shadows of the boughs. I never saw such eyes before. The others, surprised by his cry, halted and turned, but Legolas started to ride back. No, no, cried Gimli. Do as you please in your madness, but let me first get down from this horse. I wish to see no eyes. Stay, Legolas Greenleaf, said Gandalf. Don't go back into the wood, not yet. Now is not your time. Even as he spoke, there came forward out of the trees 3 strange shapes. As tall as trolls they were, 12 feet or more in height. Their strong bodies, stout as young trees, seemed to be clad with raiment or with hide of close-fitting grey and brown. Their limbs were long, and their hands had many fingers. Their hair was stiff, and their beards grey-green as moss. They gazed out with solemn eyes, but they were not looking at the riders. Their eyes were bent northwards. Suddenly they lifted their long hands to their mouths and sent forth ringing calls, clear as notes of a horn, but more musical and various. The calls were answered, and turning again, the riders saw other creatures of the same kind approaching, striding through the grass. They came swiftly from the north, walking like wading herons in their gait, but not in their speed, for their legs and their long paces beat quicker than the heron's wings. The riders cried aloud in wonder, and some set their hands upon their sword hilts. You need no weapons, said Gandalf. These are but herdsmen. They're not enemies. Indeed, they're not concerned with us at all. So it seemed to be, for as he spoke, the tall creatures, without a glance at the riders, strode into the wood and vanished. Herdsmen?
Alright, everyone, I'm gonna call into this life for tonight. And my head's killing me right now. So I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who continues to stop by. I definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe out there.